Good morning. A meeting of the Transportation Policy Committee is called to order. A quorum is present. For those participating via Zoom, please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you are not speaking to create a positive experience for all attendees. For those in the room today, please be aware that the microphone may pick up sidebar conversations. These conversations might not be heard in the room, but they may be broadcast. Item number 2, call to the audience. Members of the public were asked to submit written comments related to this meeting through the MAG website. Comments may be sent any time leading up to the meeting, but must be received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. MAG staff, would you please share with us the public comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we received a handful of public comments for today's meeting. The first comment is from Bristow at lcv.org. Begin comment. Momentum plan. We need more money for public transportation and urban greenways. End comment. The second comment is from T. Argueta at lcv.com. Begin comments. Heat and pollution must be the indicator's metrics to improve safety in transportation. End comments. The third comment comes from milnerk@gmail.com. Begin comments. With over 44% of trips in the MAG region requiring 3 miles or less of travel, our system could unlock barriers to walking and biking with funding for targeted strategies. These strategies provide significant benefits, including reduced vehicular congestion, improved air quality, and reduced capital investments needed for vehicular capacity infrastructure improvements. End comments. The fourth comment comes from Gregory P. Haggerty, Arizona Board of Directors. Begin comments. Madam Chair and members of the Maricopa Association of Governments Transportation Policy Committee, as a professional engineer and member of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Arizona Board of Directors, who resides and works in Maricopa County, I thank you for the opportunity to address the committee in written form. The American Council of Engineering Companies of Arizona represents 200 member firms and 5,000 engineers and land surveyors who protect public health, safety, and welfare through infrastructure development. We are passionate about planning, designing, constructing, and rehabilitating infrastructure throughout the MAG region. ACEC Arizona fully supports the development of a regional transportation plan that provides the flexibility to meet the future transportation needs of the MAG region. We applaud the efforts of the committee members to develop and to secure a long-term funding mechanism for continued investment in our transportation system. Voter-supported investments in infrastructure produce advancements in transportation technology, economic development, regional competitiveness, and quality of life. We encourage you to continue and to complete this important work that you have started. In the months ahead, you can count on ACEC Arizona to serve as an engaged and eager partner to local, regional, and legislative efforts. We thank the committee for your tireless efforts, and we commit to promoting and assisting in the delivery of your vision for a successful regional transportation plan. End comment. The fifth comment comes from Tim Reed at bbarely@gmail.com. Hello, begin comments. Hello, thank you for taking my comments regarding the late phase public input report. I have 2 main comments. One, in a population of about 5 million in Maricopa County, it appears that a very small number of this population have been reached for input and comments. This is a project of great magnitude that will impact county residents for decades. Additional efforts need to be made to connect with residents, particularly those in underrepresented communities, communities of color, lower income residents, and those who do not and/or cannot drive a car, etc. Please make a greater effort to connect with the people here before final decisions are made. I found out about this project very late and through word of mouth, so any previous outreach efforts clearly did not reach me or many others. If you want to have a better chance of passing the 1 cent tax proposal, more people need to be involved in the process. Number 2, I did not see any kind of sustainability rating for the options presented. How will these options impact the environment? For example, how much will adding extra lanes and highways contribute to the urban heat island effect? How will these decisions impact communities? End of comment. The next comment is from Ryan woz@gmail.com. I'd like to begin comments. I'd like to ask the members of the Transportation Policy Committee to take a critical look at the transportation goals of the region as a multimodal system that should balance opportunities for access and mobility for all users. Access has not been provided equitably. A significant number of households face significant barriers to affordable mobility and access to the promise of a healthy, prosperous life. A focused address to this issue deserves your voice and advocacy. There are coalitions ready to stand behind you in this effort to find balance in our mobility choices and find balance between local and regional mobility trade-offs. If this is worth your priority, it is worthy of a measurement MAG staff can track and verify progress and milestones. I ask you to consider this in the development of the programming of the Regional Transportation Plan to keep these goals in focus for the next 20 plus years. The last 30 plus years have been dominated by measuring vehicular congestion, and many other goals have been deprioritized in this scheme. The next 20 plus years should avoid this same blind spot. Lastly, before growing the expansive and expensive freeway system, estimating the tax burden this places on future taxpayers should also be transparent with potential taxation schemes that might be developed in the near future to shoulder this burden. Currently, building and maintaining these systems have isolated conversations. This siloed effect is to the determinant to the real cost of the systems pursued. This may be politically expedient, but it is incomplete and obscures the real cost to taxpayers. Thank you for your attention to these underrepresented concerns. Sincerely, Ryan Wozniak. End comment. This ends public comment.
Wonderful. Thank you to all those who participated in our comment for those important words. Item 3 is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 3A through 3E are on the agenda. Does any member of the TPC have questions or would like a presentation on any of these items?
Second.
We have a motion from Mayor Wires and a second from Mayor Hartke. Is there any discussion of the motion? All right, can we begin with a voice vote of those in the room? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. And then can our virtual participants raise their virtual hands if they are in support of the motion? If we do not see your hand up, we will call your name. All right. Mayor Hall is with us by phone. So Mayor Hall, how do you vote?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. Mayor Woods, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Mayor Weiss, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Mayor Barney, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Okay, is his
Thank
hand
you.
up?
I thought I
Perfect.
had my hand up. Took it down.
You did. I'm sorry, it went down and then I was too slow. And did Mr. DeClusen?
Aye.
All right. And I will try to do an alphabetical next time, but it was the order in which popped up on the blocks. So I believe we have a unanimous vote. Item 5 is an update on the development of a new regional transportation plan. MAG Transportation Staff Audra Kesters-Thomas will provide a report.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. Good to be back with you 10 days after our last meeting to provide an update associated with the development of the next regional transportation plan to inform the extension of Proposition 400. We have a presentation today. We'll pick up where we left off. We'll present the public engagement report as referenced in public comment today, revisit the assumptions underlying our fundamental plan development process, and then open it up for additional feedback from all of you, as well as direction on next steps. Next slide. So again, we met just a week and a half ago, provided at that point just a high-level overview of the public engagement we had been including and completing at that time and provided some of the high-level themes that we had heard. We have now distributed the full public engagement report, good 150 pages worth of reading. I hope you've had a chance to review it. We'll provide additional information and highlights as well today. We also then presented 2 revised scenarios based on the direction of Transportation Policy Committee in May, which was to build from the system optimization half-cent scenario, acquire feedback from member agencies on anything that may be missing out of that scenario, with a request to provide letters articulating those priorities to MAG by the end of May. We took that guidance to the best of our abilities, accommodated those requests, and then came back on the 4th of June to present 2 new alternatives. One that was at 0.6 cents for a 20-year term, and a second at a half cent for a 25-year term. Conversation at our Friday meeting largely focused on the half cent 25-year option. We had robust discussion, as you will recall, at that meeting, and we'll be bringing back some of the assumptions underlying that today for further discussion and, of course, your feedback. Today's presentation, I will again touch on the public engagement report from the Pick Your Path events that we held concurrent to our committee review in May. We will revisit the assumptions that was intended for your meeting on the 4th. We will pick up where we left off there. Again, we're focused at this point from your direction on that half cent 25-year scenario, and then provide the opportunity to hear from you on policy direction and next steps as we polish off the final touches to a draft plan. Next slide. So let's revisit public engagement. Next slide. I have some fresh numbers. You saw these in the report if you've had a chance to review. We did leverage a largely virtual engagement opportunity, built out a website that was interactive, included the opportunity for folks to participate and provide feedback in the same way if they participated in a virtual meeting. We also had an interactive map with the different projects included in each of the 4 scenarios originally developed back in May. We received almost 1,000 comments through our website. We did have a live chat feature where constituents in the public could interact and chat with members of our planning team. We had over 500 attendees at our virtual events, meetings, opportunities, any requests we didn't turn down, and ensured that we provided staff at civic organizations, including some of your youth councils at the end, right before school got out, and we were pleased to speak with some of your youth leaders in your communities as well. And then finally, as articulated in federal statute, we did invite our federal agency partners and other transportation stakeholders to learn more of where we're at in the process, provide updates to us, perhaps on activities underway with them, as well as the opportunity to take their feedback as well. And that occurred concurrently to our TPC meeting back on the 4th as well. Next slide. So common themes coming out of the report. Again, it's 150 pages full of all of the feedback that we did end up receiving. But again, I don't think any of this will surprise you necessarily either. Folks land similarly to our policymakers, somewhere in between each of these scenarios, a combination and a mix, if you will, of the different projects and programs that were articulated in each of the 4 scenarios. As has been consistent, not only with our public engagement research, the input that we have received over the course of the last couple of years, as well as the polling that we have done, constituents are in favor and willing to pay more if they get more in transportation. There's a high support level for transportation investments, particularly in this region, as you all know, dating back to the research that we did in our values mapping. There is and continues to be requests and priorities on expanding our transit portfolio in particular to complement, of course, the continued investment in our freeway network, but not to leave transit behind. And then particularly amongst our youth and our underserved populations, very much a focus on transit, but I would say even more so on the matters relating to equity as well as environmental sustainability. This was really prominent, especially in meetings for which we were invited to and participation in some of the virtual meetings that we held. These are top of mind, particularly for these populations. Next slide. Let's move on then to the assumptions. Again, this was intended to be part of our meeting back on the 4th, but we had such a good conversation, we ended up having to conclude that meeting and wanted to carry these forward. You have seen these assumptions articulated in a matrix, 2 matrices before, as well as supporting technical memorandum over the course of the previous months. We wanted to take the time in a series of slides here to review kind of the high level or fundamental assumptions that really are the underpinnings for the scenarios and really the preferred one that we're developing right now, to ensure that there's clarity and to seek any additional feedback that you might have. So we'll walk through these one slide at a time. Next slide. So first, some general assumptions. Again, just to remind Transportation Policy Committee, we are resetting the buckets and formula approach accordingly as part of this new development of a regional transportation plan to inform the extension of Proposition 400. Therefore, the sales tax association between modes is also reset. We've long believed, and you've provided the direction, that flexibility is going to be a cornerstone of our work ahead, especially looking at a 25-year investment portfolio. Those decisions on needing to pivot or otherwise change in reflection of the future reside with you as the Transportation Policy Committee, as well as Regional Council, not to be articulated through state statute. That investments should be sub-regionally balanced. And then finally, that the RTP funding decisions and program management does occur at MAG with good partnership with our partners, ADOT implementing the Freeway program, our member agencies implementing the arterial projects, and our transit partners, notably Valley Metro, in concert with the City of Phoenix, implementing the transit program. Chairwoman Gallego, I don't know if you would like me to proceed in the subsequent slides or pause here in case there are any questions on this particular set of assumptions.
Seeing no hands raised, and we will move forward.
Next slide, please. Moving on to the arterial assumptions, again, carrying forward from the Proposition 400 program, the arterial program projects are capped at the lesser of a 70% regional estimated cost share, or the program's amount accordingly. And only new arterials that begin construction activities on or after the beginning of the tax, January 1st of 2026, would be eligible for reimbursement. Again, these are both consistent with Proposition 400 era policy. I'll pause here if there are any questions.
Councilmember Durham.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm confused about point number 6, that only new arterials are eligible for reimbursement. What does that mean exactly? Does construction on old arterials, reconstruction of old arterials, will that qualify?
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the TPC, the intent there is for the work to be considered new in keeping with voter expectation. So the roadway itself doesn't need to be new. It can be an existing roadway, but the project itself should be new and enabled through this additional tax.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, we'll move on to the next slide. Here are transit assumptions for high-capacity transit capital matches, light rail at 30% of the capital cost, light rail system improvements, so this is to the established system, multiple jurisdictions involved in improvements to the system itself, as 70% capital match, streetcar at 30% capital match, and BRT at 70% capital match. You'll see on this slide, we, in parentheses, note the assumption that those BRT projects would not chase the capital investment grant program. Not to say that they can't. If there is an opportunity, we want to make sure that we don't compete against each other with our capital investment grant projects. And that's one of the reasons why there's a larger proportional share here for the BRT projects. If it makes sense at a time in the future for a BRT project included in this plan to potentially chase a capital investment grant strategy. We would certainly champion that as long as we have further discussion that would likely reduce the regional share cost accordingly. For rail operations, that continues to be ongoing responsibility of local agencies for which the facility traverses. Capital rail replacement costs, also referred to rail TAM or transit asset management, would be the responsibility of the region. And then bus capital and the bus operating assistance formula approach would be a performance-based allocation. As we've discussed before, the intent here is to ensure contiguous and consistent service across jurisdictions. And therefore, we had proposed that the regional supergrid and BRT service would be eligible to compete for the formula-based approach on top of the base allocation coming out of Proposition 400. Funding ultimately would be decoupled from actual or specific routes. And as you'll see here highlighted in a different color based on your direction at TPC, we will be bringing forth in the next slide, as was requested, our approach to how we might be able to fit circulators as part of an eligible criteria as part of this formula-based approach. Before I move on to presenting that circulator concept, I want to pause here to see if there are any other questions.
Do we have any questions? All right, we are ready to move on.
We'll proceed to the next slide. Thank you very much. So as I noted at TPC on the 4th of June, we were requested to further investigate how we might be able to fit in and complement the system's investments with the potential eligibility of circulators. The overall philosophy MAG has taken, of course, to the transit program in general, as well as the overall regional investment portfolio, is with scarce regional dollars, we want to make sure those investments are placed where they're absolutely and most needed. And especially for transit service, the emphasis is on the contiguousness of the regional system itself. With that direction, we went back, started to look at potential opportunities for how a circulator might become eligible for the formula-based approach. We're presenting this for your feedback today. Again, we will be consistent with a performance-based approach using the same formulatic approach, ridership, as well as revenue service miles, the two criteria, allocating up to 10% of that formula for circulator service. No more than 30% of a particular jurisdiction's circulator costs would be picked up by the region. If the amount of funding requests for circulators exceeds that 10% set aside, we would then prorate the available revenues within that cap to the agencies for which are requesting that circulator reimbursement. And that there is a 50% multiplier also attached to the ridership and revenue miles coming in to be calculated as part of the overall formula. And then finally, circulator costs cannot be funded through an agency's base allocation consistent with Proposition 400. I will note this complicates certainly the formula, adds a couple extra steps. Certainly from an administrative perspective, that's a little bit more complicated, but certainly not insurmountable. I did also want to note in this region particularly, all existing circulators, I believe with the exception of one, are currently fare-free or free to the public. There is no associated fare box revenue currently with the circulator service for most of those deployed in the region. I just want to note that because fare box recovery, of course, is one of those important components to the overall transit program as well. So I will stop there. This is largely new information for the Transportation Policy Committee in response to your request. We're happy to entertain any specific questions.
We'll begin with, is that Councilwoman Binswanger?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Madam Chair, I first of all want to thank you for including circulators and working this in. I really appreciate that. Obviously, Peoria has been, very supportive of this transit tool for many years. But I want to be clear that, we share the belief that regional funding should go to regional projects. And so in meeting this criteria, we want to make certain that, or at least, request from this group consensus that circulators that are eligible for funding connect to the regional fixed route system. I don't think it can be any circulator necessarily, but in this criteria, it needs to support and connect to the regional fixed route system. Is that specified in this criteria, or is this still, you know, a working document that is not set in stone as far as the criteria or these requirements?
Madam Chairwoman, Councilwoman Binswacher, thank you for that feedback. We did not necessarily include that additional criteria that a circulator must connect to the established grid service, recognizing at this point our current grid network for transit bus operations is not fully fleshed out. So for some communities, a circulator option which circulates best addresses transit operations for local constituencies within a smaller area. If there was a need to add or connect to the regional grid network, that may mean many miles of unproductive service to connect into the established grid. We didn't want that necessarily to be a barrier, but to your point, Councilwoman Binswacher, we're presenting these as draft today and are looking forward to your additional feedback if that's something that you feel strongly about.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate that, you know, there's some structure to this, and I would be interested to hear from any of the other members how they feel about this. And if that is a future meeting, that's fine that we get into that detail. But I just, again, want to be clear that Peoria supports, you know, funding circulators that connect to the regional system. I think that's really important.
And thank you, Councilwoman. We'll go to Mayor Wires and then Mayor Weiss.
No, thank you. My question is on the very bottom. It says nearly all the circulators in the valley currently are operating on no charge. Is that because of COVID? Or I know the city of Glendale, it cost us more to count the quarters than it did to just not charge. And quite honestly, I think it's worked out very well for us. I was curious if COVID had a part of that.
Mayor Gallego, Mayor Wires, no, that's been a policy decision of local communities outside of COVID that the local circulators, and that's not unique to this region, are free for use by their constituencies. I just wanted to note it that there isn't a regional fare policy for circulators. To this date, because they have been funded wholly locally, local jurisdictions have made those policy decisions on fare, and most of them, as I noted, have gone fare free.
Thank you.
Mayor Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When we're talking about this, and I agree with Bridget on this, I appreciate the circulators being put in. Avondale has the Zoom that supports Goodyear and other cities, and we're looking to expand that and use our Southwest Valley partners and to kind of do a regional type circulator. Does the addition or cooperation of other cities with a circulator impact any of these formulas, or is it done on a city-by-city basis? And I guess what I'm getting at is, if going forward with this formula, if Goodyear and Tolleson and Buckeye or Litchfield Park wanted to be a part of this, is it all done through one application, one type thing, or does each city have to do its own thing?
Councilwoman, or excuse me, Mayor Gallego, Mayor Weiss, it is at the direction of the agencies who operate circulators, whether or not they would like their circulator opted in for the consideration of partial regional funding. If, and we know there are some circulators that operate across multiple jurisdictions, we would need simply that direction from those agencies that you would like those included. At the end of the day, what's driving the proportionality of available regional funding is that circulator's performance, and that comes down to the two criteria of ridership and revenue miles.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, Mayor Harkey.
So I do appreciate the circulators are looking at being eligible for regional funding. I'm a little concerned just that the funding for circulators is coming out of the bus operating assistance. So I would request to look at the funds being added to the bus operating assistance program to additional funding for the circulators so that the circulators do not take away from the bus operating systems, and that the program should also be set up in a way that allows new routes to realistically compete with existing routes. And, you know, the comment about tying into existing bus lines, I understand both sides of that, and because this could certainly be whether they're free or not, a revenue booster to the system if these tie in. But I'm also sensitive that it may or may not make sense to extend new routes for the sake of just, you know, including a circulator. But to me, that could be a sweet spot when possible, and maybe adding more value to the circulator if indeed it brings in the revenue to the existing bus system as well. So thank you.
Chairwoman Gallego, Mayor Hartke, thank you for that feedback. Again, we're at the fiscally constrained component of this process, and so we appreciate and hear your feedback that perhaps there should be more funding available for this new addition for circulators. We would be looking to your direction as to where that funding would come from. Our fiscally constrained program, perhaps that's the arterial program in specific, but we'll need that direction from you on where that money will come from.
Okay.
Okay, I do not see any other comments on circulators.
So Chairwoman Gallego, this completes the suite of assumptions that really underlie or serve as the foundation, if you will, of not only the consensus revised scenario that we are currently working with you in partnership to develop, but certainly ultimately will set forth the policy guidance once we actually adopt a plan and successfully get this through an election. With that, I will go to the next slides where we can open it up for further discussion. Next slide. So we are here to hear from you today to take your policy direction. Those assumptions, we've answered some questions, want to certainly vet any further questions that you might have. We are again at the decision-making part of this process. We do have some additional administrative refinements that we have found in putting together the materials for June 4th. We would like to bundle the feedback we received from you today into a final draft, if you will, for our next meeting later this month, so that we can come to you, if you will, with a final draft package for your potential endorsement, so that we can move on to the next process or phase of this process, which will actually include phasing come July. But I think I'll pause here, and Chairwoman Gallego, if you want to open it up for any questions or comments, we'd be certainly willing to take those at this point.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. You have had quite a busy week little over a week since we last met, and we really appreciate you responding to feedback from the committee. And we'll begin with questions, and then this is noted for information, discussion, and possible action. Last meeting, we were able to make some pretty important decisions, including looking at the rate and the term by broad consensus. So my proposal is if we do have broad consensus, we'll move forward in the same way. And if there is division, we can go by motions. All right, so we'll begin with questions. Mayor Osborne.
Really, just to kick off the conversation, from the Buckeye perspective, we're grateful that we're talking about an additional 5 years in the program, which you kind of alluded to that we had agreed to in the last meeting. That means that there is at least an interim condition, State Route 30, that is built between State Route 85 and Loop 303, and that is a huge regional impact, relieving the traffic that is on I-10. In addition, with that funding, there are certain other projects in Glendale and Surprise, and kind of spreading that money around. The additional monies, the $8 billion, as I understand it, additional money that gets moved into regional projects in the West Valley, and Buckeye is in full support of the direction that we're headed. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I would ask if staff could put up the members of the committee who are participating virtually. That would be very helpful for. Perfect. Chairman Sellers.
Yeah, I guess this is more of a comment than a question. You know, my biggest concern is that last check, we're still growing at 300 people a day in Maricopa County. And with the Intel and the TSMI announcements recently, I don't see any slowdown in that growth. And I get concerned about ensuring that we do have the flexibility and the money available to plan a future infrastructure system for the next 20 or 25 years.
Mayor Barney.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a great program that I've heard here today. My only concern is the funding for the collectors, or not the collectors, but circulators. I think that funding should come from the transit portion of the funds, meaning there's more money in there and it'd be easier and less felt coming from that larger pot rather than coming from any other source. So thank you.
And maybe does staff want, with the staff proposal today, where would the circulator funding?
Chairwoman Gallego, members of the Transportation Policy Committee, we are currently proposing that up to 10% of the current formula allocation for bus operating assistance would be open to eligible circulators. So again, it's currently the proposal is within the existing formula that we have proposed. Mayor Hartke has offered perhaps an addition or offering for additional funding to be added to the circulator component.
Wonderful. So it would be helpful if there was an alternative proposal to bring it forward, but at the moment it is consistent with what Mayor Barney had.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think I saw someone on my left. Nope. Mayor.
Thank you. I just find this horribly encouraging. I just want to say thank you for all the hard work that's gone into this. It looks like really great progress has been made, and I particularly want to compliment the hard work of the West Valley mayors coming together to find common ground. From the Mesa perspective, I think that we are very, very close. I apologize that I missed our last meeting as I was out of town. The last issue that Mesa needs addressed is the high-capacity transit projects in the East Valley, and specifically the Fiesta District streetcar expansion. I would request that MAG staff refines the scenarios based on today's conversation, and that they accommodate an additional 2.5 miles to the existing streetcar extension project. This will also serve to help balance regional funding. But with that change, I feel like Mesa at this point can really very enthusiastically get behind and support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner. I think one of the things I just want to comment on as it relates to the entire program, and again, I would concur with Mayor Giles and the incredible progress that's been made, and really speaks to the collaborative nature of this group. So I'm proud to sit with all of you and work on this. I think we need to set really clear expectations with the public as we go through this process. There may be an expectation even amongst us that we're going to be able to accomplish as much with a half cent over the next 20 or 25 years that we did over the last 20 years. And that's just simply mathematically impossible. Construction costs have absolutely, and right-of-way acquisition costs have more than doubled since this was adopted 20 plus years ago now. And we just need to really, I think, be clear about the expectation. If we want to be able to do more or even do equal to what has been done over the last 20 years, there really has to be a lot more money in the program, because purely the costs of doing business in the transportation space have gone up so much. So I just want to be clear about the expectation. We're going to be able to get about half as much done, maybe even less, depending on how many times we have to rebalance this over the next 20 years. But we're going to get about half as much done over the next 20 years that we've been able to get done over the last 20. And I want to make sure we're keeping that in mind. Thank you. And I think you're very aligned with what Chairman Teller said, that there's so many additional needs. I would say this is necessary, but not sufficient. And we hopefully other branches of government will also be key partners with us as well in this all-important investment. Commissioner Lombard.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. I want to applaud as well the West Valley mayors for coming together and finding a solution to fund SR 30 out to Buckeye. I applaud you for that and that cooperative nature. As well, I do want to thank Mayor Giles in terms of streetcar in the to Fiesta. I believe that is a very important, and we support that.
Thank you. And I do want to, you said 20 or 25 years, and we are moving forward with 25 years unless people say otherwise. So I think that's one that we made major progress on June 4th. Mayor Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You know, I want to say I appreciate the leadership of the West Valley mayors, especially Jerry, Eric, and Skip. I think it was a difficult discussion yesterday, but I also think that the West Valley sees the benefits that this compromise provides, not only for us, but for the region as a whole. I do have a question for MAG staff. When I look at some funding, especially for what Mayor Giles is talking about, and Chairman Sellers, I think that you bring up a very good point. I worry about costs getting out of hand moving forward over the next 20 years. I look at the development that is happening not only in the West Valley, but everywhere, and I'm concerned that there's not enough money put aside to anticipate and react to things that we may not be able to foresee right now. And I'm wondering, when I look at, I spent the weekend going through Prop 400, Prop 500, traffic counts, presentations, and there's an area that is, and I'll read it off to you, it's MAG 20-RTP-304, and it's freeway litter, landscape, and sweep. And it comes in at about $438 million over the life of the 25 years. And I'm wondering if all of that is going to be needed for the 25 years, if ADOT can take some of that. I would like to take some of those funds. And again, the decision doesn't have to be made today because I know it's very short notice, but I'd like to have a discussion in the future of, is there a way to take some of those funds and set them aside for things that pop up that we can't anticipate? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TPC. Thank you for that question, Mayor Weiss. I think one of the strategic changes we made in approaching this round of funding is the flexibility. And once again, I think that we have money set aside in a number of programs. We talked about the transit program. We have safety funding and other programs set asides. And in addition, because we're moving forward without the firewalls in place, we have a lot more flexibility than we had before. And so I think we actually we're in a much better position of being able to react to changes in the environment, whatever those may be in the future, than we had in the past. Once again, we put handcuffs on us, quite frankly, in Prop 400. There was reasons for doing that. That was the first multimodal tax that this region had done. But I think that our strategy moving forward, maximizing the flexibility, we talked about the changing technologies, trying to predict what technologies are going to be prevalent in 2040 is impossible. Quite frankly, we think we know, but once again, I think that flexibility is really going to pay off for us in the future.
Madam Chair, Eric, I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We will go to Mayor Woods and then Mayor Ware.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to quickly echo and kind of second Mayor Giles's comments of the conversation about the streetcar extension from Tempe out to the city of Mesa would be tremendously helpful to our residents and would further continue to connect our two cities and provide for a lot more mobility. We are talking a lot of the city about ways for people to get around without the use of a car. And when we were first, doing the streetcar project, one of the concerns that was raised by a lot of our residents was they felt that the streetcar just sort of provided a loop in the downtown area and kind of along Apache, but didn't really have kind of more regional connectivity. And so the connection eastbound on Rio Salado over to the Cub Stadium and the areas that Mayor Giles and I have talked about, privately, and I know we've also talked with MAG about, that would be tremendously helpful to, I believe, not just the cities of Tempe and Mesa, but frankly to the entire region. And so I definitely wanted to make sure that I seconded, his comments on the record.
Thank you, Mayor Woods. Mayor Waters.
Thank you. I guess I'd like briefly just to talk a little bit about yesterday. West Valley mayors got together. I think we had a robust, spirited discussion. But the beauty of it, when we were finished, we all came to an agreement that is going to affect all of the West Valley dramatically, tremendously. And I want to express my appreciation for Eric and Georgia and basically everybody in the West Valley. We don't always necessarily agree on everything, but sometimes you can agree that you're not going to be able to agree and then move on. And so I was very pleased with the way yesterday went. At the same time, I do want to also express my thoughts on the East Valley. I have every confidence in the world that Mesa, along with the East Valley cities, will be able to work out the minor differences that they have right now. I have no doubt in my mind they'll be able to accomplish the very same thing that we got done yesterday. Get their region together and everybody agrees. So I've actually looking forward to hearing in short time that they're good to go. With that, at the same time, I think it's important that Eric actually would summarize the agreement that the West Valley came to yesterday, so everybody understands that. And then when he's finished, I would like to make a motion to adopt those projects. No, well, I'm thinking this, Eric. There you go.
Thank you. I work for a company. We had 5 Erics in the room, so it was difficult, but so I understand it. Yes, we had a very good discussion. So the discussion started with the city of Buckeye agreeing to take a reduced interim facility, which freed up about $396 million roughly. So these numbers are coming off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. But in addition, there was discussion about moving that money onto 3 traffic interchanges on the 303, including Olive, Northern, and Northern Parkway. Those 3, Northern in particular, it does not have a TI. It does not have interchange, and it's actually the road that accesses the zoo out there too. And when the 303 opened as a full freeway, there were a lot of concerns expressed about the lack of access to that important West Valley facility. In addition, the Northern Parkway interchange was an interim condition. So once again, trying to fit the project into the funding, the scope of that traffic interchange was reduced to actually include the light. And then Olive Avenue also does not have an interchange too. It's a little trickier because there's a railroad that runs through there from just north of Luke Air Force Base out to further in the West Valley. So those 3 interchanges will be included using the money that's freed up from the reduction in the State Route 30 scope. In addition, one of the major projects that I think are really important for the region is the US 6303 connection too. That also is an interim connection today. There's a stoplight. It works okay today, but I think as we see the whole Northwest Valley build out, fueled by TMSC at I-17 and Carefree Highway, it certainly is going to put additional traffic demands on the 303. And in addition, that particular interchange has a lot of interest among some important legislators of the Northwest Valley too. So once again, I think for a variety of reasons, the technical reason meaning it's needed from a traffic perspective, certainly over the life of our extension. We think that's also an appropriate use of those funds. In addition, as Mayor Wires talked about at, I think, our last TPC meeting, they have 3 or 4 arterial projects that they would like included too, using those cost savings from the State Route 30 project. And I don't have those 4 or 5 projects in front of me, unfortunately. Maybe Audra, maybe you do.
Yes, certainly I can certainly list off these projects. Again, a recap, 4 freeway projects, interchanges at the 303 in Northern Avenue, 303 in Northern Parkway, 303 in Olive Avenue, the ultimate interchange at the 303 in US 60 Grand Avenue, as well as 4 additional projects, Glendale Avenue, Litchfield Road to 99th, 91st Avenue, Orangewood to Northern Avenues, Ballpark Boulevard, Bethany Home to State Farm Stadium, as well as Starville, Camelback to Peoria Avenue. So that's a combination of 8 different projects that funding savings from the different selection of the SR 30 Western interim facility would be able to fund.
Thank you. So if we're going to get into motions, perhaps we could do one to move forward with the proposals presented by staff, including the circulator proposal, the high capacity transit proposal, and the West Side proposal that was just outlined by the MAG team.
Madam Chair, I like that motion because it's wonderfully vague. My concern was if we did get into here is our RPT, I'm not ready to make that vote. But I do hope that, but I am in favor of the motion that you just made.
Perfect. And we would bring forward in perhaps MAP or in the packet what Audra and Eric just outlined, so that
if I heard Audra earlier, I think she said we're going to come back with a final draft package, and I certainly endorse that.
And so this would be moving forward, and it would not be a final commitment, but at least it would help us at our next meeting to have something to work off of. So
yeah, and I don't know if that needs to be a motion that's voted on, or if consensus. I defer to others as far as how the mechanics of the process ought to go, but.
Chairwoman Gallego, Mayor Giles, I think we're looking for direction to build that final draft preferred alternative. If there's consensus and that direction's provided us today, great. If you want to combine the series of assumptions we presented today with the additional feedback today in a motion to develop or to use as the development of the preferred draft scenario, we can certainly take that as well, and that would certainly affirm the direction we've received.
Thank you. That's my preference, is that we proceed as the chair and Audra indicated with, and come back at our next. I know we're meeting so frequently now, we're not really asking for a lot of patience. We'll be back here in a week or so, I think, with a more fleshed out plan. So I support that motion, and if it hasn't already made, I make that as a motion.
And it sounded like she did not need a motion if we feel like there's consensus with the items
I'll second that consensus.
Oh dear.
Good luck to whoever is making the minutes of this meeting.
Okay. Maybe I'll turn to MAG staff. Do you feel like you have enough to go forward, or would you like us to vote? Okay, and for those who could not hear, Commissioner Daniels suggested a speak now or. Just forever hold your peace, yeah. Commissioner. Is your microphone on?
No. Usually people prefer that. I'm inclined to support the packages moving forward at $0.005 in 25 years. And I think 25 years was a good solution to help us get more money to the table. But it's not lost on me what Chairman Sellers, or Jack Sellers, has said, and former Mayor Daniels has said. I do worry that one of the things that we do as a region that's most important is to provide transportation, and we have enormous numbers of people moving here every day, and having that infrastructure is really important. Moving forward on the 30 is important. Mayor Giles, I applaud you for adding the streetcar back in. I think that's really important as we move things forward. But I do worry that this is not as much money as we think that it is. And so while I'm inclined to support the numbers that we're talking about, I would also be inclined to support a bigger number. I know that we've all had lots of discussion about that and been talking about what the voters will tolerate. But I guess I do want to speak that piece that if people were interested in something higher, I probably would be as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mayor Woods.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I know we've been talking about whether a formal vote is needed or just simply consensus of the group. I mean, I'm fine with just simple consensus, and just wanted to get that on the record to either clarify or further confuse things. But for me, I'm fine with just simply doing consensus without a vote. But that's your decision and those who are in the room. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Chairman Sellers and then Mayor Harkey.
Well, and thank you, Charles, for your comments. My biggest concern is that I don't really feel that we are ready to decide on a final plan. The next 20 or 25 years is really, really going to be critical for us having a plan that will sustain the lifestyle that has made us an attractive place. And as much as I really applaud the work that's been done by MAG. They've done incredible work in putting this plan together. I'm just not sure we're ready to say that's the final plan we want to go forward with.
Thank you, Chairman. Mayor.
Yeah, I too look forward to, at our next meeting coming up, to have more of a final say at this. So I add my consent to the consensus, if that's an appropriate phrase. I still think there's a lot, perhaps on sub-region things, at least in the East Valley, of conversation, but I look forward to this process continuing and us gathering in a couple weeks.
Wonderful, thank you. And it would be helpful, we are getting very close to the end, so we do need, if there are any regional discussions to happen, that they really happen quite quickly, or people, it would be helpful just to propose any additional steps we need to have, because we are hopeful to, I think no one will be 100% happy, but hopefully something, a product that we can all be proud to move forward and to take to the voters, recognizing that we have several steps forward. We have a lot of work in front of us, but turn to Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the TPC. Just a couple of comments on the funding discussion. Clearly, more funding is better, no doubt about it. But once again, we have some hurdles in front of us. We have a legislature that is not terribly friendly at the moment. So I think we have to recognize that. I have a letter from a current member of the Board of Supervisors that said he would not support anything above a half cent. That was written a couple of years ago and has not been involved in this process. So I'll just leave that as is. We also know that the other 14 counties have authority to go to a full 1 cent. Maricopa County does not. And we also know that the amount of revenue flowing into the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund, which is fundamental for highway maintenance and roadway maintenance, as well as construction activities, is declining. And so, we have multiple opportunities here in the future. So once again, the way I see this from my position is that certainty. Let's get the half cent extended. We need to work on the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund. That's a statewide significant issue. And once again, I've been banging that drum for 20 years, as Dave knows. But maybe we'll have a change in the composition of the legislature, and maybe we have an opportunity in the future. Also, I think that Maricopa County needs to continue to push for a full 1 cent authorization, which provide an opportunity in the future to go back to the citizens again. So once again, I think it's not a perfect process. I think in a perfect world, if we needed a 1 cent, we'd go to the legislature, say, this is what we need. That would be it. But I think from a political strategy standpoint, I think that is, unfortunately, I think in this day and age, it's probably not terribly high probability of success in that strategy. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Berry.
Maybe this is a little bit off center, but the Biden administration has a a whole big infrastructure plan, and they can't spend the money fast enough. Now, so far, there's a lot of nothing has gone or been authorized, and they're really working on, both the Republicans and the Democrats, working on exactly what is infrastructure and how broad is it. But I think there's a lot of opportunities for our state and for this region with these billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that are going into infrastructure. So I think it would be nice if we could fold that right into what we're doing, because I think Arizona has a lot of opportunities there, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Mayor Lloyd.
Everybody's comments on this, but the feeling I get by the last couple of statements is we're going to go backwards for a while. And when you repeat and go backwards, and those that aren't quite satisfied come back in, and all your negotiations, all the consensus you have change. So I'm a little disturbed by this. We reached a certain point, and it was a solution. Everybody was fine with that. We were all ready to give our sacrifices up. But when you rework it again, it changes. And it may change to how you want it, but then the other people that don't want it are back where we were from the very beginning. So, in my view, nobody knows about the economic side of it. It's always going to be a question. No matter what you vote, it's going to be that way until we get something from the federal government that really states it. So we shouldn't be making decisions on the future, on if we're going to get it. When are we going to get it? Well, we can't do this. But I think you're headed for a little explosion if you go back on this and bring the cities back together again. This took a lot of patience and giving by everybody. And so those who still feel that raw edge, you're going to have to live with it for a while. Thank you.
Mayor Weiss. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree. I hate using the term consensus, but we've come to an informal agreement on 25 years and half cent. And while we can disagree on how the sausage is made, I think we need to move forward and start putting a plan in place. And I like Eric Anderson's comments about flexibility in the plan. To take a step back here and rework this delays us. We are already behind the 8 ball, and this legislature is not getting any more friendly to what we're trying to do. And I think we need to move forward.
Thank you. And we have nodding from Mayor Peterson. Wonderful. And I think we will all agree that we're going to have to keep looking at federal funds, state funds. Some people here have spent decades on the gas tax, and that debate will continue. But I think this plan is responsible in that it exists in a broader ecosystem and gives us some flexibility based on what happens in the American Jobs Plan or whatever infrastructure aid comes from the federal government. Allows us the ability to work with the state, and hopefully we will elect pro-infrastructure candidates who will be great partners for the TPC. But certainly when we move forward with this plan, we will not have solved all of the challenges, but I think we can be proud that we're making very important steps forward. All right, and maybe MAG staff could talk about schedule and.
Certainly, Chairwoman Gallego. Would you pull back up our presentation, Craig, for one moment? We'll conclude with a slide that talks a little bit to next steps. Next slide. So we hope to see you again soon. Date to be determined, but as we have articulated, we're at the decision-making point of this process and certainly want before the end of the month to get an endorsement specifically of the preferred scenario for which we will bring back for a final review for your consideration and action. That would include the specific high-capacity projects for which we've discussed, the programmatic set-aside investments for which we have proposed, as well as the underlying assumptions for which we've also discussed today. And then also included with that would be the approval of the proposed sales tax rate and term that supports, of course, that composition of projects programs as articulated. We would like to do that within the next week or so to bring then to Regional Council for their additional endorsement. We would then bring you back in July to begin the next phase, which will be the phasing of the specific projects over the course of the term for which you agree to, whether that's 20 or 25 years, in order to proceed into air quality conformity, so that in July we can work through the phasing components of the projects themselves, present that to you again for your second action, which would be to recommend entering into air quality conformity, final process associated with the federal statutory requirements in a non-attainment area.
All right. That seems like a responsible path forward, and we'll thank everyone for working in the hottest season. Of course, indoors, yes. But busy time for all of those who are involved in this. All right, then we will move on to our next agenda item, which is item 6, the MAG Freeway Noise Analysis Study Update, Technical Memorandum number 1. MAG Transportation Staff John Bowen will provide this update.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the TPC. Next slide, please. So this agenda item represents a follow-up to discussion that we had back in February. So I will kick the agenda item off, just giving you a little bit of context. We've certainly covered a lot of ground on other things since February, so hopefully reorient you to the discussion. And then I will turn it over to our guest today, our project manager for the study, who's joining us virtually. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we've had a number of different discussions over the course of the past 2 years about the regional freeway system and the state of the current pavement overlay, if you will. Of course, there's a number of different trade-offs associated with that. But most recently, back in June of 2020, the MAG Regional Council approved a pilot to explore the use of a diamond grind surface treatment on freeways instead of rubberized asphalt. So this was a solution that still provided additional noise reduction, albeit at a lower life cycle cost. So as part of that action, there were 3 projects identified. The scopes were formally modified to include the diamond grind surface treatment. And then over the course of the time frame, ADOT, in coordination with MAG, would assess a number of different elements, including what the life cycle costs were, the quality of ride, and then, of course, public acceptance of this new material. Next slide, please. So back in late 2020, the first of the 3 pilot projects opened to traffic. That was the Loop 101 widening Price Freeway between Baseline and 202. Since opening, ADOT had received a number of different public comments, largely concerns about traffic noise. So that led to our update to the Transportation Policy Committee back in February. Next slide, please. And then some of the key elements there was that following the installation of the diamond grind surface treatment, ADOT actually went out and took noise readings to compare those to the rubberized asphalt that was on the surface before. Those noise readings indicated that the noise levels were similar. In fact, in some cases, they were actually lower with the diamond grind surface treatment. However, this was in conflict with what we were hearing from the public, who seemed to indicate that noise levels had gone up. In response, ADOT went out and performed a series of courtesy noise readings at several of those residences, again finding similar results. So when we presented this information to you all back in February, direction was provided for MAG to conduct an independent noise study analysis to look at the different characteristics of the noise along the corridor. So since that point, we have gone out and brought a consultant on board, Volpe National Transportation Systems Center, which is a not-for-profit entity affiliated with the United States Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. And we want to give you an update today to talk a little bit about the project as well as our methodology, and certainly provide you all with an opportunity to ask any questions and or guide the study process before we actually get out there and start. Next slide, please. So I'm pleased to be virtually joined today by the Volpe project manager, Dr. Aaron Hastings. Dr. Hastings holds a PhD in acoustics. He also has significant experience with the Volpe National Transportation Systems Center and actually was involved in the development of the federal noise model. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron to guide us through the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. If we can go to the next slide. So before we get started in talking about the work plan, what I would like to do is describe a little bit about how we work with noise and how we describe it. So the first thing I just want to mention is that typically with noise control issues, especially related to highway noise, we look at things from a source, path, receptor type of model. So we're interested in understanding the noise generated by the source, how it propagates from the source to the receptor, and then how the receptor perceives that sound. And when we characterize that noise, we basically look at three different characteristics. We look at the amplitude, which we typically perceive as loudness. We look at the frequency, which we typically will perceive as the pitch of a sound, or if a sound is tonal versus not tonal. And then we also look at the time of the sound. How long does it last, and what kind of variation is occurring over that duration? So those are the types of things that we look at, and that's how we typically model sound. And so if we can go to the next slide, we'll see 4 different measurement techniques that we are going to be using in this process to characterize the sound at the source, along the path, and at the receptor. The 4 types of measurements that we're looking at are what's called onboard sound intensity, which is a tool for measuring the sound right at the tire pavement interface. That's where the distinction between diamond grind and the rubberized asphalt overlay is really being developed. It's at that tire pavement interface. So the onboard sound intensity, or OBSI, is a method for getting the best measurements of that sound source. The next thing that we'll be looking at is the effective flow resistance. That's a measure of basically how acoustically absorptive the pavement is. So something like a concrete is typically very acoustically reflective, and something like dirt or earth is very absorptive, and the rubberized asphalt is going to be somewhere in between. So this is a method that we can measure that, and it gives us some understanding of how the source is generated, but also how that sound is propagated over the highway as well. The next measurement that we're looking at is wayside measurements. This is the most standard type of measurement that people conduct for highway noise. This is, you can see the picture to the left. There's a picture of a sound level meter with a semi driving by on the highway. So these are measurements that take place just off the highway. What they do is they allow us to capture all the sound that's being generated by the road, or by the traffic noise, I should say. So that includes the tire pavement, which is the issue that we're mostly concerned about here, but it also includes the engine noise and aerodynamic noise. And it's important for us to know those things because it affects what is the ability for changes in the pavement to affect the total level. So if you have really high engine level noise, then changing the tire pavement noise is not going to be as effective. In this case, we think it's mostly going to be tire pavement noise, but we need to understand both of those in order to get a full picture.
Finally, we'll be looking at residential measurements, which are very similar to the wayside measurements. It's mostly just the locality and the duration that we do for those. And so if we can go to the next slide, and then the next slide, please. We'll start talking about kind of the actual areas and work plan for this. So we're looking at trying to characterize the difference between aged rubberized asphalt overlay, which is what was currently on the roads, comparing that to the new diamond grind, which is what's potentially going in, for example, at Price Freeway. So in order to understand these two different types of pavements, to characterize the noise characteristics of them, we're looking at primarily 4 study areas. There's 2 diamond grind, both are Loop 101, that's Price Freeway and Pima Freeway. And then we're looking at 2 aged rubberized asphalt overlays, State Route 51, Fiesta Freeway, and Loop 202, Santan Freeway. So we'll be doing measurements in those 4 study areas. We will also be doing some measurements, particularly the OBSI measurements, on Loop 202, the South Mountain Freeway, because that represents new rubberized asphalt overlay, which basically helps us bookend kind of the range of measurements that we can get. If we can go to the next slide, please. So to start, we will start with some preliminary measurements, which will take place in July, and we will be outside doing these measurements, not inside in the air conditioning. But this is an off-peak season, but what we're really looking at for this is to basically get some basic noise measurements. These will be wayside measurements, so we can basically screen out locations along each of these corridors and identify the best locations for us to obtain measurements. And not only are we looking at the wayside noise levels, but we're also looking at other characteristics of the area. So we want to have a good diversity of measurement types as far as what the environmental conditions are going to be. So we're going to be looking at depressed roadway alignments, because that's what we're seeing already with Price Freeway. But we also want to look at the pavement age and the pavement type. So that's the diamond grind and the rubberized asphalt overlay. So we're going to be looking at multiple locations for those. Use of ramps, because that can affect the noise generation. And then also the presence of noise barriers, because those affect the path. And then finally, we want to make sure that the places we are doing the measurements are going to be adjacent to the residents, because those are the people that are going to be suffering or feeling the most impact from these differences. So that's going to give us a good wide range of sound characteristics that we can look at. And then finally, when we're doing this, we will be making sure that there's no extraneous noises such as construction noise, which can make interpreting the data more difficult. So we'll be doing these preliminary measurements in July, and after we've done those measurements, we'll go through, sort through the data, and we will come up with a final list of measurement locations for the full measurement period. If we can go to the next slide. So for the full measurement period, we'll be doing several different measurements in the various areas. For each area, there'll be 2 wayside measurements. So that's a total for the 4 areas. That's a total of 8 measurement locations. And we'll come up with at least 2 hours of clean wayside data from those. We'll also be conducting 1 EFR measurement in each corridor for a total of 4 EFR measurements. And then we'll be doing 2 different types of residential measurements. We'll be doing some attended measurements, which are very similar to what ADOT-EP did. And those, the main purpose there is to get as many measurements as we can that can help us build the picture of what's going on. Those are short period measurements that total about 30 minutes each. But then we also want to understand how the sound is varying over longer periods of time, because this is one of the comments from the communities. So we'll be doing unattended long-term measurements that last a week long, and we'll have a total of 4 of those going on during the measurement period. And then finally, for each of the main 4 corridors, we'll be doing 2 locations for OBSI, but we'll also be adding in the South Mountain Freeway to get 2 more, again, for that new rubberized asphalt overlay. If we can go to the next slide. So what we expect to come out of this is a couple different things. So we're really trying to address issues that the community raised in relationship to the introduction of this diamond grind pavement, as well as some of the reporting that ADOT-EP did. So we're trying to address some of those comments. We'll be focusing on for example, traffic analysis. When ADOT was doing their measurements, this wasn't necessarily a primary focus of theirs. We will be focusing on accounting for the variation in traffic volume. So we'll do this in two ways. We will be measuring with different volumes, specifically looking for peak times. And then we can also adjust those so that we can do comparisons between the different locations. So each location is going to have different volumes. We'll be able to normalize that so we can do apples to apples comparisons. But the main focus here is to make sure that we're capturing the worst hour for daytime noise and the worst hour for nighttime noise. So we'll be looking at those peak rush hours. And then also that's going to occur on the peak work days, which is Thursday and Friday. So most of the data collection will happen on Thursday and Friday in the morning and the afternoon during peak traffic hours. In order to understand some of the other sound fluctuations, we'll also be doing those residential measurements, and the week-long ones are really going to help us understand a lot of the different types of variation that can be occurring. So those can be hour-to-hour variations, day-to-day variations, night versus day type of variations. We will be collecting those data to analyze those types of variations. And then finally, a lot of the comments, as John was mentioning to earlier, when ADOT did their measurements, they found very similar levels. But the sound level, although that's a policy, a sound policy process, doesn't necessarily give you some of the details. So we'll also be looking at the spectral characteristics of the measurements. And the OBSI is a great way to get that information, but we can also pull that from the wayside and residential measurements. And looking at those spectral data, that will help us to understand why the residents are reacting to these different pavements the way they are. So that's kind of the brief overview of the work plan. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Aaron. If we can advance slides, please. Advance slide one more time. So in terms of what we're in store for, so as Aaron mentioned, we will be out doing our sort of first round of data collection this summer, largely focused on site selection. And then once we've identified those sites, as well as collected some initial data, we do intend on coming back to the TPC, let you know what we found. And then that will also be somewhat concurrent too with the full data collection. So again, we're waiting until September in the attempt to capture peak traffic. So as we all know, traffic volumes in the summer are not quite as strong as they are in the fall, certainly when school is back. So we will collect that throughout the month of September and then ultimately come with the final data for you all at the November TPC meeting. Next slide, please. So with that being said, I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions or Aaron can answer any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, John and Aaron. Questions? Commissioner Daniels.
Thank you, and thanks for that presentation. I just want to flag a couple of things just for us to continue to discuss. So no major implications today. I don't want there to be perceived that. But I do have to ask the question from MAG's perspective, was the rubberized asphalt maintained by ADOT in the way that it was both spec'd and intended to be maintained in order to continue with the quality of the rubberized asphalt?
Madam Chair, members of the TPC, so certainly this region, we were actually one of the first regions to actually roll out the rubberized asphalt. Recognition that, from an industry perspective, there's probably been development since we first laid it down. We would defer to our partners at ADOT as the implementing agency to talk through some of those issues, and we can certainly have them at future meetings. But, I think the main point of emphasis that there are sections of the system with rubberized asphalt, 15, 17, almost 20 years old. And as a reminder, the expected life of rubberized asphalt is only 10 years. And so certainly throughout the region, we have a lot of rubberized asphalt that has exceeded its expected useful life. And that really, I think, brings upon us this big policy conversation that we're at today.
As a follow-up to that, while cost and sound are both really important components that we're weighing here, I just want to flag a couple more that we should probably incorporate into the final decision as we move forward. One is the ability for the diamond grind to handle water, especially excessive amounts of water during a monsoon season. Obviously, safety being a primary concern there. And then the other component is if there's any compromise at all to the structure through this particular technique. As we grind into what I would consider to be the foundation. You know, I know in my house I'm not allowed to grind into my foundation. It could compromise the integrity of that foundation. I just want to ensure that we're looking at all of those components as well. And again, I'm not sold on one way or the other. If we're going to put the rubberized asphalt down, we need to make sure that we maintain it to its standard so that we do get the longest and most useful life out of it. And that's a policy level decision. We're not going to be rubberized. We're not rubberizing the entire system statewide. And so that is what I would consider to be a higher standard of practice in our region. And I think our residents likely would demand some higher level of service. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. But I think there are some other components besides just cost and noise that we should consider in the broader conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll go to Mayor Woods and then Mayor Wires.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick thing. Just wanted to thank you for the very thorough presentation and talking about the work that's going to be done along with the accompanying timeline. And I know a lot of this came up because I first raised an issue about some noise concerns that were coming up in some of our South Tempe neighborhoods. And since this has all happened, I've tried to regularly communicate through my office to those residents. We've probably got about 300 people on a listserv who are just reading the information that MAG continues to provide. And the residents that I've spoken with have all been very appreciative of the information and the timeline and the scope of work that's been laid out. And so just wanted to, really just to offer a thank you for, to all the other folks here on the committee that have supported this moving forward. And thank you to MAG staff and for everyone for keeping this going. I know, our South Tempe residents very, very deeply appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Woods, for your leadership. Mayor Wires.
No, thank you. For anyone that lives in the West Valley, we're all aware Luke Air Force Base in the wintertime is a lot more noisy than they are in the summertime. And it's not because they're doing more flights or less flights, it's because of air density. The air is much heavier in the wintertime, and that sound tends to travel a lot more, stays lower, especially with cloud cover. So really what my question is twofold. I question the timing on doing the test in September. If we have temperatures that in September is commonly always 100 degrees or somewhere in the less than 105 anyway, with rubberized asphalt, it's going to be more pliable, it's going to be softer, it's going to tend to absorb more than it would be, say, November. And that's not technical, that's just common sense. I wonder if it wouldn't be wise to do the testing maybe 6 weeks later, just to get a real accurate measurement, because I don't think you're going to get the same measurement you would in September than you would in November. So it's just a thought.
John?
Madam Chair, members of the TPC, Aaron, I'll let you speak to that from a technical perspective, if you could.
Sure. Thanks, John. Madam Chair. So you raised some great points. Typically, the way we understand the noise, tire pavement noise, is it actually increases with temperature. But I totally take your point that because it's rubberized, it's actually going to be stiffening. At the same time, the tires are stiffening as well. So they will actually be radiating sound less efficiently because they're not as flexible. That being said, the only way to know how those two things trade off would be to do some additional measurements. We could also try to look into that a little bit more to get a little bit more information on it. One of the things you also mentioned was the issue about the atmosphere. One of the things, it's not just the atmosphere is denser in the winter, but it's also that density change. So really close to the ground, if that density is different than high up in the air, you get temperature inversions. Actually, if you can go, Craig, if you can go back to, it looks like slide 15. Yes, slide 15. It's the one that says expected outcomes. Yeah, so here you actually see some of those temperature inversions. And we're hoping that we'll be able to capture some of that effect for the week-long residential measurements, because we will be measuring throughout the day and throughout the night as the temperature on the ground cools at a different rate than in the upper atmosphere. You get these temperature inversions, which can cause the sound to move back down. So we will actually be getting some kind of information about that potential change in these measurements. That being said, it's always great to do more measurements. I'm an empirical physical scientist, so I love to do that, but we would have to think about, what the cost benefit would be for that.
Thank you, Mayor Hartke.
Thank you. Thank you for the study that's going to go on it. We're also hearing a lot of those comments too from Chandler that borders Tempe on the 101. I did have one other question, John, as you're pursuing some of the answers that Jen Daniels raised. How many times can you do a diamond grind without having to rebuild the base, as opposed to just what does a unit take in terms of its structural, and what's the long-term maintenance cost of one versus another? If you could look into that too, please.
Sure, certainly, Madam Chair, members of the TPC. I can speak to some of that off the top of my head, but can certainly follow up with more detailed information. So as part of the noise study report that we did about a year ago now, we looked at some of those trade-offs. And so part of the challenge is no matter what we do, we will not be able to diamond grind the entirety of the system, because some of it will be predicated on going in and repairing or rehabbing or replacing, if you will, the base. So what our data has found is that if you were to just take a concrete base, you could diamond grind that up to 3 times before you actually have to go back in and do a capital rehab. But certainly we can provide that information in subsequent updates and nicely summarize it for you.
And follow-up question is, and did you say it's about every 10 years, or what is the, okay.
That's correct. The expected life of rubberized asphalt, the rubberized asphalt that we use throughout the system, is 10 years.
But of a diamond grind, what's the anticipated outcome before you need to readdress that?
So ADOT is still, Madam Chair, members of the TPC, ADOT's still doing research there. They believe that you can get at least 15 years out of the initial cut. You can also do more, I would call it more minor capital maintenance type activities where you don't have to go back in, but it's just a quick resurfacing every 15 years was their initial thought, although what they have found is that duration is even longer than originally anticipated. And so based on the preliminary data from ADOT, the maintenance with the diamond grind is significantly less than rubberized asphalt.
Mayor.
Madam Chair, I just want to join Mayors Hartke and Woods as one of the impacted jurisdictions and thank you, MAG staff, for what we've reviewed this proposed noise study and think it's, you give a thumbs up, looks great. Thank you. We're looking forward to the outcome.
Mayor Lord. My comments are more superficial, but I'm going to come from a feminine side and neighborhood look. I worry about reflection of the sun. When we repair roads, there's different processes, and I wish I knew technical so I could repeat those to you. But what happens is a glow to the road. There were several roads in our city that I left at nighttime from the city hall, and it rained. I couldn't see the road. It was all glossy. And that was from a repair, okay? So, and whenever they change something, they don't do it all at once. So what about the look of it? So, I mean, how does the transition look? And I think that's important. And not only that, in that transition, what is the likelihood that there's not going to be problems as they extend that? So there's some of the things that that I hadn't thought about before, and of course, just the name itself. So I said, well, if you fall down, will you get cut? You know, Right? Didn't you first think about that? I know the technicians would come after us for that comment, but so I think some really common sense of how people feel when they see something and they touch. You know, that's all. Those senses are very important to people and products. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lord. Wonderful. Thank you, and thanks to anyone who'll be outside in July along the freeway system. Item 7 is a legislative update. MAG staff Nathan Pryor will provide a report.
How about now? Better? Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. Next slide, please. Really picking up on what Mr. Berry said about the American Jobs Plan, obviously negotiations continue. We saw last week conversations end with GOP Senate leadership. Now bipartisan negotiations are occurring with House and Senate members. I think I read today that they're even being put on a timeline now, maybe 7 to 10 days to bring something to fruition. If not, then perhaps beyond that point, we'll see the Democrats go along without a bipartisan proposal. Next slide, please. Also, the Invest in American Act has been proposed. This is the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. The current reauthorization is set to expire at the end of September. This has been proposed by House Democrats, largely similar to what we saw last year. A difference here is we're seeing $92 million in Arizona projects. That was through that earmark process or the community project funding process we saw over the spring. For this region, we're seeing about $33 million, 10 projects for the MAG region. Next slide, please. This is a really important part that I wanted to bring up. And the next slide. Back up. There you go. So there's an important provision in the INVEST Act that we've been working on for a number of years. And we've brought this to your attention, Regional Council, member agencies over time. And this is regarding the federal formula allocations. Some of the factors, if you will, that go into the federal funding formulas are coming up on beyond 20 years old. Some of this is tied to 2000 census information. Some of it has to do with information from the mid and late 2000s in terms of vehicle miles in the region. So we've been pushing this for some time now, that the formula funds, the formulas themselves need to be looked at. Congressman Stanton has placed this language in the INVEST Act. In the maps that you see there on the side, you can see the red states. Those are the fast-growing states who are being disproportionately affected negatively with the current formula funding allocations. So we've been in contact with, in regular contact with Intermountain West MPOs like MAG, pushing this issue. So happy to report that this language has been included in the INVEST Act, and that emphasis is in consultation with state DOTs, and I'll jump down to the end, to look for more data-driven or equitable apportionment of funding. So, you know, it is now 20 years along since we've had updates to these formulas in terms of the data. Fast-growing state, fast-growing region, this simply cannot stand. There has to be a correction at some point. So we would offer to you that you thank Congressman Stanton for inserting this language in the INVEST Act. Please contact your congressional representatives, encourage them to support this provision. I've been in conversation with ADOT's Government Relations Office as well, hopefully getting the state DOT to provide support as well. The challenge in this is there's perceived winners and losers. And if that's the case, we're the losers right now. So you think of the other states, particularly in the East and Midwest, who are benefiting from the current formula funding allocation, they don't like this. So when we have conversations with our national associations, this is a very challenging conversation. We understand as well that with AASHTO, so the state DOTs, if you will, are reluctant to pick up this conversation as well. So it's up to all of us to be pushing this issue with our congressional offices, with any associations that you work with. Of course, we have ADOT here, but really pushing for support of this provision to rectify the funding formula allocations.
With that, Madam Chair, I'm available for any questions.
Questions? Thank you so much for your work on this very important issue. Item number 8 is request by membership for an item on a future agenda. Commissioner Daniels.
Thank you. This is not urgent yet. So I just want to preface that with staff. I know you guys are diligently working on a number of projects that are nearing completion. And so I want to make sure I'm sensitive to that. But I know staff to staff, MAG, PAG, CAG, are oftentimes have collaborative conversations and discussions. And since we are moving past some of the COVID restrictions that we've all experienced over the last year, I would love to see an opportunity for some planning amongst board members to take place as well, to create and develop some relationships between those planning organizations at the board levels or at the TPC level, so that we can start to look at where some of these connections are happening and where, maybe our MAG regional funding ends and their contributions begin. And so I just would like to see us maybe do that and work that into the plan over the next maybe 6 to 12 months to see if we can get the leadership decision makers together to have those conversations.
Thank you. Any comments or announcements from the membership?
Sure.
Dr. Harkey.
So coming from MAG, I would just like to present this to you from MAG, from us, for your service, your dedicated service as the chair of the TPC this past year. I look forward to trying to follow your leadership and do as good a job as you have. And so it's coming from this board and from MAG, we want to thank you. Now, that also means that even though this is the last meeting, there still might be one more that you'll still be leading. So take your piece, but be ready to lead in case we meet once more this month. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I shall remain on call, but I'm really proud of all the work we did together. Thank you. We've made some very tough decisions, but I hope when we all retire from our positions on this committee, this will be one of the things we are most proud to have been part of, and we're looking forward to your leadership during an incredibly important part of moving the plan forward. So thank you. Business is now concluded. The meeting is adjourned. For those of you attending in person, please don't forget to get your parking ticks validated and take any of your personal belongings.